Well, we're already at the third series of AXA Insights, and this month is so exciting because we shall be deep diving into the conversations everyone is having right now, our world in the time of artificial intelligence. We will look at how it is transforming education, the trepidation many are experiencing, and debunking some of those myths. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and waters of which we choose to work, to learn, and to live. I'm coming you from Whadjuk Noongar country here in Perth. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and we thank them for their contributions to the education of all learners here in Australia. Today, I'm very excited because I have Dr. Lucinda McKnight, who is an internationally recognised expert in the field of digital literacies, especially in generative AI and writing. Now, she aims to change international national conversation about the meaningful and authentic writing pedagogies in a digital AI-driven age. She's been identified as one of 12 global thought leaders in AI content creation, and she sits on Turnitin's International Advisory Board and the Future of Writing, and is also on the editorial boards of the Journal of Education for Teaching, English in Australia, and Curriculum Perspectives. And I know I'm especially interested in that because the amount of times I've had to put my Turnitin when I was doing my master's, that was very exciting to see that you were there. Lucinda is on the Publications Committee for the International Association for the Advancement of Curriculum Studies. Lucinda also runs the Teaching Digital Writing project, where educators can access some of her work for supporting teachers with AI and a glimpse of the volume of work she has produced in this area. We're very lucky here at AXA because she's part of our Curriculum Perspectives editorial team, and we're just so lucky to have her here today. So welcome, Lucinda.
Thank you so much. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri land here.
Start off with what hopefully is an easy one. What were your motivations for entering the education sector?
Well, I did a Bachelor of Arts in English and Fine Arts at university, and when I left uni, I had a variety of different jobs. I worked as a personal assistant to a fashion designer, and I worked in publishing as a layout artist, and I worked in a bookshop, and none of those jobs was very rewarding. So I decided I was going to go back to uni and do what I swore I would never do, which was become a teacher. And so I became an English teacher. And from the very first day of my diploma of education, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And one of the things that I loved about it was that it got me to indulge my passion for writing, and that sort of grew into the teaching of writing, a passion for the teaching of writing. So I think that's really why I'm here today too.
Just that kind of, even you're talking about the publishing or working in a bookshop, most of us would think that would be heaven, working in a bookshop, but I can imagine when you're there every day and you have to work in that, you don't get that luxury of being able to read and explore the books yourself. Now, just in the thoughts of artificial intelligence, this is not a new concept. And I suppose if we look at it, we will maybe understand it, that it's being the origins of artificial intelligence have gone back to the work of Alan Turing and the imitation game of 1950. So there's a lot, and there's also associated with the coding and programming. It has been slowly simmering for some time, but then we've seen this exponential growth. What was it that saw you starting to deep dive into AI?
I was interested in digital writing. So after being an English teacher, I did a PhD in writing for the screen, looking at teaching writing for the screen, for creating websites, teaching the creation of websites and things like that. So I was in that digital literacy space. I was interested in digital writing. I'd put in a big grant application for an Australian Research Council funded project teaching digital writing, and I was just waiting to hear about that project. And in the I think I was waiting to hear about it, or had I already heard? Anyway, I was interested in working in that space, and so I kept Googling and looking for things and researching about digital writing, and I came across AI writers, as they were called back then. This was about the Australian summer of 2020-21, and I'd started to read occasional things in the media about GPT-3, as it was at the time, and the way that it was writing media articles, and I'd read those with great interest. And then I remember one day just sitting at my desk, I opened up one of these early AI writers, and I put in, a an instruction, as you did in those days, a few keywords for it to write an article for me. And seconds later, bang, there it was. And
Yes.
I experienced then what so many millions of people in the world experienced after ChatGPT exploded, but sometime earlier. And I just sat straight up in my chair when this happened, and I thought, whoa, this is going to be big. This is going to be really big.
Yes.
So I then wrote and published my first academic article on generative AI and writing in 2021. And I knew then that if I got the digital writing funding, or when I started the project, that this would be the focus of it. So I was already working there. I had already been working on that project for a year before ChatGPT came out. So suddenly my niche little area of research became, interesting to the whole world. But I should also mention too, I don't know how many people realize this, but my kids were telling me for years about how they were using at school, or their friends, of course, were using at school, AI spinners and paraphrasers.
Okay.
So, kids were onto this long before adults, and they were using these things for years in school. So teachers who would be thinking, oh, I haven't marked an essay written by generative AI. I'm sorry, but you have.
You have been. Yes.
Even back when ChatGPT came out, they would have.
Yeah. Well, that was very interesting, because last night, as I was dredging my way through my 15-year-old son, trying to get him to really understand electronic configuration of atoms, there was a question. There was one part of the question I thought, oh, actually, I don't know that bit. And I thought, oh, I'll have a look, try to sort of go through the textbook, all those sorts of things. And then he said he got it. And I said, how did you get it so quickly? He's like, oh, I just stick it into Snapchat. I said, Snapchat? He's like, yeah, it's got an AI function. And my mind was blown, because I think slightly in our generation, it's the ChatGPT, or, we kind of know a few other elements of AI, but to think that the actual content that children are accessing through the kind of messaging and the social media side was quite mind-blowing for me. But he got the right answer, so I suppose I had to let him go with that. Now, in one of your papers, you look at the very common phrase that we hear, that AI is just a tool. Now, your paper really explores the semantics of some of that terminology, but really at that face value level, if we're thinking of the educator, why do you think we've got this narrative that it's just a tool? Is AI really that uncomfortable a space for many?
I think we use the word tool about it because it's just a handy word to describe what it is. But I think we need to interrogate that word really carefully, because it's not just a tool like a hammer or something like that. Italy banned ChatGPT. When people say, oh, it's just like a calculator. Well, I don't think any country ever banned a calculator.
No.
If you think of it as just a tool, it's really, really short selling it, in a sense, in terms of what its implications are for us and what its impacts already are for us. It is a massive, massive threat in all sorts of ways. Obviously, it's, I love some of the fabulous things artists are doing with it, and I'm really into some of their work. Charlie Engman is a great person to look at if anyone wants some inspiration. Fabulous photography. But I think we really need to think very carefully about what it means. Now, just as an example of this, just even in the last few days, the LA Times started implementing an AI tool that would demonstrate any biases, presumably most likely left-leaning biases in articles, and present alternative points of view.
Wow.
In the media this morning, I read that they've already had to remove that function because one of the things that it came up with was that the KKK was just a response to societal conditions.
Wow.
So these tools, so to speak, are incredibly rhetorically driven in terms of being created by people with desires and wishes and differential power relationships. And I think the Guardian newspaper has had campaign recently, don't let a billionaire's algorithm decide what you read. And I think we need to equally be thinking, well, do we want a billionaire's algorithm or algorithms to be deciding what we write? Because we know more and more research is coming out to show that these things speak in a white, male, affluent voice. So when you ask a group of kids, students in a class, maybe you've got some Indigenous students in your class, First Nation students, and you're going to say to them, well, I want you to do this assignment with using Gen AI. You're actually asking them to write in an American white male affluent voice. What does that mean? So these are the sorts of really critical kinds of engagements that we need to have with it. It's not just a tool, like it's a neutral kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because we are in an age where we're actually not keeping up sometimes, you know, and we've seen that with a lot of schools taking on the banning of mobile phones or restricted use of many kind of programs for teaching, you know, no YouTube, no whatever, you know, these sorts of things. And it feels very restrictive when we know that the future of education is going to be shaped by the young people that we're working with. And so it is, I suppose, our responsibility to be that guide through the process rather than restrict it whilst we catch up. And it's a real difference in mindset of what we are as educators, I think. And I think AI has been a pretty big driver in that. So, you know, your work extends to many advisory boards nationally and internationally on the role of AI in writing. Now, in education, there's often this push, as we said, to keep up with AI systems. And it's as if we're wanting to catch students out in some ways, that by using AI, they're cheating and they haven't got the knowledge and framework. And they're sort of cutting these corners that we want them to go through. How would you like to approach this sentiment?
Well, I think that is very quickly becoming an outdated sentiment. We don't use the word cheating really so much in relation to these things at my university anymore, because all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, are finding that these AI systems or services, I'll use rather than tools, data extraction machines is the way some people describe them, to keep in the forefront of people's minds that their data is often flowing off to them and they are the product. We're using different kinds of language for them and thinking about them differently. They're embedded in all these products that we're using, and it's increasingly difficult to disentangle the human and the machine. And we are in the work of preparing students for the world, and they will be using Gen AI in their careers and workplaces and things. So we're trying to do this juggle of teaching them how to use it responsibly and ethically and everything, and also try to remain really critical about it. I mean, one of the things seems to be that students just don't really understand, and many people don't understand what it is and how it works. Everyone has an opinion about it, but with my colleague Leon Furs, we have done a lot of speaking around Australia and internationally about generative AI in education, and we would often ask who has a ChatGPT account at the start of any talk that we'd give, and only a few people would put up their hands, even till quite recently. So people have had their heads in the sand and have just, been quick to say, oh, it's cheating to use it, we'll block it, or which is impossible. It's like blocking air. It's sort of everywhere. So I'm sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded answer, I think, to that question. But
that's perfect, because I think it really it's touched on a few really good points. I think as a parent and as a educator, some of those things that we know students are using, we know what it is. They have to look at it from the critical lens and see what it is. But I think you're right. The actual understanding of it just isn't there. And so, and it's not even like in the education sector, it's around, the dinner parties, the conversation with colleagues, the somebody else, at the coffee shop. It's kind of a phrase that people use, but they don't understand the depth of what it is as well. I think that's a really, really important part of it's in that vernacular that we're using every day. And just knowing that it's been around for so long. It's one of those things. I was saying to someone the other day, I'd studied linguistics and done a lot of work, and I remember the drudgery of trying to work out how to, put my clauses in and all the kind of the language configurations. And then I used my Gmail account, and I'm lucky because I know where to put my commas because it just does it for me. And it asks me questions. Would you like to add this phrase? And you're thinking, this is wonderful. And also forgetting that actually I'm learning at the same time. I'm learning that is the right phrase to use, or this is how I construct something. And I think we lose that sometimes and don't see that students are learning by the advice that AI gives them along the way.
As long as they remember that it's advice that comes from a particular place.
Yes.
Because we already know through research that generative AI or AI used in assessment narrows the language that students use. It narrows the nature of their essays. It narrows their, if they use various sort of dialects or colloquialisms or things like that, it's going to stamp things like that out. And a short story that I absolutely love that I always use when I'm teaching punctuation or teaching pre-service teachers how to teach punctuation is this gorgeous short story which uses no punctuation whatsoever. Yeah. So emphasizing that punctuation or choices made about punctuation are creative acts, and punctuation is a resource rather than a set of rules. But in the world of generative AI, unless it's programmed that way, it's not going to say that to you. It's going to mark you right or wrong. So people like, I don't know, author William Golding or people like that who love to make up words in their writing, they're going to have those words marked wrong. Most likely. So it's a yes, it can teach you things without a doubt, but it also can shut a whole lot of things down.
Yes.
Unless we're really critical about trying to understand how the non-transparent algorithms behind it are working and where it's coming from, because really it's also referred to sometimes as a giant cliche machine. That wasn't my term, but it's one that I find is quite powerful for people. When they think of it like that, they suddenly go, oh, now I understand why maybe you might not want to use it for your writing.
Yes. And I think that point you've made earlier on as well, I look at it and, here I am as an English person in Australia, and so many phrases that I use, even with my own children who, raised in an Australian environment, they don't understand. And I think we're in that danger, and especially dialects and kind of, if I look at, I'm from the northeast of England, and there's so many words that translate differently. I suppose AI takes that away. And so
it doesn't. Honestly, I am starting to get so many applications from potential PhD students. So they're emails to me and proposals and CVs, and I can see I don't need to put it into an AI detector. It's all written by generative AI, and it's all horribly, horribly bland. So I've started writing back to some of those students saying, I would rather see you and who you are and who you're going to be as my student, because it's a relationship between you and me. It's not about generative AI. I don't really care so much that your syntax is absolutely perfect and your commas are in all the right places. It writes at a very superficial sort of level with a tone of, I call it obsequiousness. That is really, to me, off-putting, and it's not with me. It's not going to get you where you want to get with me. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that too, with people becoming, because there's a hype cycle with it. First of all, you're kind of seduced by it and enthralled by it, and after a while, you think, I've spent a lot of time mucking about with this, and the thing that I've got out of it in the end perhaps isn't as good as what I would have just written myself in the first place.
100%. Yeah. And, and also it doesn't have that voice of the passion that you have for something and how you would approach something. And very interesting what you're saying now. I was talking to a good friend of mine who is a nurse manager and recruitment. And she said, we try to do as much face-to-face recruitment and going through the conversations with people and have that. And she said, I had two applicants who she said I could literally visibly see them typing in the question as I was speaking and then being able to do that question. And she said, I was like, wow. And she said, yeah, that's why we often do now face to face for that very reason, so that we know very much quickly what's happening.
So some of these students who are writing to me are able to do something quite sophisticated in a very short period of time. They put in some of their work, maybe their master's thesis, and then they put one of my articles, mash them together in some Gen AI, and they're able to come up with a very, powerful argument about how all the insights they have from my work and how they're specifically relevant to their work.
Yes.
Right. So that can seem quite flattering to begin with. When you read it, you think, oh, this student's really read my work. But no,
read my work,
they haven't read it. And, they haven't written what they have apparently written. So we all need to get more and more aware of how it's potentially cheapening communication between us, because we start to just regard what we receive as guff, this AI authored guff. And what's that going to mean?
Yeah, definitely. And it's quite funny, isn't it, when you're saying about that, it's flattering because someone's writing about your work, but then also that sense of, well, you don't really know my work, like that depth of knowledge, and kind of putting that lens on. But that leads really nicely into our next question, because we live in this post-COVID pandemic world where digital technologies came with side effects, but also, it was a necessity that we had to join into. We saw less probably in Australia, but when you look at other countries who spent nearly a year with online education programs, and it was literally, and then, we talk all about the fact that many didn't have access to digital content and all that sort of thing. And we saw that one of the great side effects was that we saw communities come together. Our world, whilst vast, also seemed in quite a connected space, and we were able to maybe interact and learn more from an international point of view. But we also saw that this rise in AI required a really greater level of understanding and an acquisition of critical thinking. How can we, say, the average teacher or in the classroom or the person who's in tertiary education, how can we support students to explore and develop those skills of critical thinking?
I think that's perhaps the most important question, the most vital question, because there's some new research that I've been reading recently about the impact of Gen AI on critical thinking skills, and it is definitely harming them.
Yes.
So with that in mind, and especially looking at everything that's happening in the world at the moment, with very powerful people looking to shut down criticality in all sorts of forms, and mischaracterizing it as some kind of threat rather than as a vital component of democracies and of freedom, really.
100%.
So I think that we have to ask questions of these things. We can't have our heads in the sand. We've got to resist some of the incredible sort of ease of access and ease of use that these things offer us that make them so tempting. And we have to consider what the implications are of outsourcing things to these services. I mean, just as a basic fundamental critical thing, we've got teachers potentially designing lessons with these things. So it will do lesson planning and then it will do marking.
Yes.
And you've got to say to these teachers themselves, they've got to do critical thinking themselves. If you are going to say your job is not the design of lessons and that's not curriculum design and it's not marking, you're saying you're going to be happy to be in the classroom face to face every single day of every single week. Yes. Is that what you actually want? Is that what you want to outsource? What do you love about your work? What do you enjoy? And what is it going to mean for a kid in your class to have been marked by the same entity, assessed by the same entity all the way through school from prep to year 12?
Yes.
Because that's the software that schools are buying now. Where's where's the fairness? Where's the diversity in that? And where's the learning for the student in that?
Yes. And when we look at something like in Australia where our AITSL standards are know your students, before you start anything else, it's know your students, know how they learn. And if we're taking that element, that human element away from it, because the data shows this, we're in a dangerous space. We can quite easily keep churning out data and saying this child's this, and this. But if we don't know the child and understand, we're missing out, especially with a lot of gifted children as well, or those who have additional skills, but might not be the kind of the test takers, the ones who can produce the results that way. I think that's actually the real part, that human connection part, that we're going to really miss out on. But so I suppose linking to that, what do you think are the biggest drivers for a teacher, or a student to use AI?
Well, for teachers, it's obviously workload. It's the teacher shortage. It's what's happening in schools. There's no doubt about that. It's also pressure from leadership pushing down on teachers, that when they buy and drink the Kool-Aid, they have to sell it to their staff. They have to force staff to use it. They have to make that investment seem worthwhile. When we know that as a principle of good assessment, you use a diversity of assessment, and that the assessment is transparent, not black box like Gen AI is. So I just think the ease of use and the apparent common sense of use are things that lure people into it, perhaps most basically. But then the fact that it offers supposed efficiencies, which, as I've said, are, I think, blurry, because look at email, that was meant to make us so much more efficient, and yet I think we'd all in all professions argue that it has increased our workload extraordinarily, especially for teachers. So I think we've got to be really, really careful about thinking about what the real benefits and the real costs are of outsourcing parts of our labour to this, and getting students to outsource their thinking to it, really coming back to the critical thinking thing, because writing is thinking. Writing is not just proof of thought. It is actually the evolution of thought as you're thinking things through, so to speak. So I think that's very important.
And it was something actually I was reflecting on last night, having my husband's a teacher, and talking about things. And I think there's also this pressure as schools to to implement these whole school approaches, that everybody is consistently on the same page. We're all doing something together, and that's how we get results, if we've got consistency and the children know what's happening and we've done this. And I reflected on my own teaching career, and you get those schools where you've got that one teacher. I remember reflecting on a teacher that I went to, who's an English literature teacher, and we sat, the whole group of all the children sat in sort of like a circle, and it was with that old school, just reading the page, and the next person read the page, and the next person read the page. And I suppose that was me thinking, oh, look at all these new pedagogies coming out, and this isn't effective. But when I actually sat there, every child was engaged, because the passion that oozed out of him, and he would pick up on the nuances of little parts of the story. And I remember just thinking, wow, he hasn't got the learning objective on the board. He's not doing what we've all been told to do in this environment, but his value as a teacher was so enormous. And as you're talking about that, those, that kind of people standing in front, children know easily if you haven't got that passion, and that's how they connect, through those connections. So I think sometimes we get this pressure, as you're saying, from leadership to have this consistency. But by doing that, we lose the essence of those teachers who form a culture which is so positive and lovely.
Teaching is a human job. It's a caring job. And one of the beauties of us as human teachers is that we're all different. We're all unique. And those sorts of things need to be embraced, not feared. This whole idea of flat pack teaching, IKEA teaching, cookbook teaching, all these different kinds of, whether you want to call it direct and explicit instruction alone, because we know those are part of every teacher's toolbook. But when you're limited to doing that as, as being how people learn, it's really, I think, problematic for us.
Now, in one of the papers regarding, one of your papers regarding conversations with literary scholars, I was particularly drawn when I think one of the comments was teachers and the learners, because I realized this generational bridge between the two is not so vast anymore. We're trying to play sometimes catch up with the advance, with the children and students actually can do things quicker than us. And it comes from a very knowledge-based approach to education. The sage on the stage versus the guy by the side. And as teachers now, we must still be in the learning game. We know that we've got to be this lifelong learner, so we keep up. But in some cases, our students do know more than what we do. How do we now embrace that mindset as educators?
Well, I think embracing that mindset is quite difficult when you're in a paradigm of the teacher being the expert and just delivering,
Yes.
so to speak, through direct instruction to the students, a pure transmission model of learning that is completely outdated. So ideally, curriculum is negotiated with students. Curriculum and pedagogy are negotiated with students. Students have input, students have ownership, all of these kinds of things. I just don't know. There's a lovely article recently by my wonderful PhD student, Alice Elwell, about co-design with students. And she talks about how incredibly motivated and invested students are in her classes. So, yeah, I think that we've got to remember that teaching involves all sorts of different strategies and that teachers are the experts in their classroom in relation to which strategies they use, but that student-centered learning should not be the baby that's thrown out with the bathwater.
No.
Student-centered learning is very powerful paradigm and concept that it seems strange to relinquish. And I remember being at an education conference recently, and I heard all these people speaking about, just very rigid kind of models of teaching. They were talking about potentially the Department of Education potentially even fixing desks to the floor in rows to ensure that this kind of teaching happened, that kind of thing. And then I heard some fabulous principals speaking about things they'd done in schools that had turned schooling around for students with all kinds of challenges that they were facing. And none of those principals, none of them spoke anything about direct learning or explicit learning or being forced to sit in a chair and listen to the teacher talk for an hour to tell you how to do it. No, that's a very crude interpretation of direct or explicit instruction, but that's the crude kind of way it's actually being applied in a lot of places, where teachers just have a PowerPoint they're given that they have to teach from, that they just talk from or to, throughout a lesson, and that's considered to be education.
And often a PowerPoint that they've had no process in designing.
That's right. That's right. So we may as well have AI teaching. If that's what things are going to be reduced to. And it's interesting that Ben Williamson says that one of the key things about generative AI is that it potentially reduces teachers and students to acting as robots. It's not that robots are going to come and kill us. However, I do think that Elon Musk has said he's planning to put his robots in classrooms. Education is one of the things that he imagines them doing. So that's there potentially for us in the future. So everyone should be really careful when they think about forcing teachers to teach in robotic kinds of ways, because it will be very easy to replace us if that's all we are. And it will be done in the name of quality, so to speak. Quality is uniformity. But as you've said too, that quality doesn't necessarily have to be uniformity. There's quality in diversity.
And that depth of knowledge and understanding, I remember being at a school where it was more so that the direct instruction came in, and I remember doing, you had to this, the daily review thing every morning, and I think it was year one, and saying, what is the noun? And the noun is the name of a person, place, or thing. And I remember a parent just saying, wow, it's like a whole little room of robots now. And I had to laugh because I was so against the system. But I do remember then just thinking, but can any of these children apply that? Like outside of the context in which I taught these kind of, this is a noun, this is a noun. If you gave them a piece of work, and that could be many years down the line, do they understand that whole concept? Or, they can recite it, but we don't know if they can apply it. And I think Gen AI is actually pushing that into that space massively. We talked about that critical thinking.
And so as an English teacher, we know, and, I'm looking up behind my bookcases up here. I'm looking up behind at it. We know that teaching decontextualized grammar, just as sets of rules like that, does not affect students' writing. It doesn't affect how they're thinking as they're composing. It doesn't improve their writing. So it's debunked. That sort of thing is debunked. Obviously, yes, you have to know what a noun is, and you have to know how a noun functions in a sentence, what the purpose of it is, why you might choose this noun over that noun, or all those kinds of things. I'm not saying that grammar is not vitally important, but teaching it in rote kinds of ways, we know is not useful. But that's the kind of thing, though, that if you have an AI generated lesson, might not be taken up unless you've prompted the Gen AI to, give you a lesson that's very much in line with a particular kind of perspective. Yes. And it's this
Definitely.
kind of where things come from that's going to be more masked when everything's written by Gen AI, which I think is something to be very wary of as well.
Definitely. Now, the final question it's one of those lovely ones now, because it sort of brings us back to the human element that, we've both talked about and been so passionate about, especially as educators. But this is a lovely one also to, I think, self-reflect on. But we all remember that favorite teacher, that one who inspired us to, be those lifelong learners. Who was your favorite teacher and why?
Well, I don't want to pick one because then I feel bad about the others, but it was my English teachers in secondary school who were profoundly feminist and gave me opportunities for writing, really diverse and creative and wonderful opportunities to express myself, to explore the fulfillment that writing could give me, and gave me writing as a lifelong, enjoyment and pleasure. So those teachers have had so much impact on me, and they are the people who have also brought me into this AI space where I'm so interested in exploring what AI can mean for writing in particular, and also the awareness too. I just wanted to say this. I've just written an editorial for a Curriculum Perspectives Journal special issue on feminisms and education, and written in there about how we know UNESCO has really warned the world that girls and women are at particular risk of harm from the biases in generative AI algorithms, as are people of colour. And we have to keep saying these things really loudly. We have to reinforce them. We mustn't be afraid of this anti-woke sort of discourse that attempts to just shut down the awareness of these things. But my teachers at school gave me the love of writing, the love of literature, and also the political passion to think critically about everything that I read and everything that I write.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And I love the fact that you've had these strong female role models in that sense. That's one of those things, I think, just in sort of my field and the sort of field of STEM, that when all that research has been done, for women especially, that connection to another female who's in that role, and that very much their journey and their story is very much part of how we really connect, and does take on such a kind of helps us on our trajectory. Well, I'm going to end there because that was a wonderful way to sort of hear about you and your journey. This is something which I think is going to just continue to have this exponential growth. And I think the more that we can have these discussions and these honest and open discussions and be able to understand at a depth how it will impact the profession, I think is so important. It has been an absolute pleasure to meet with you today, Lucinda. I think there'll be a lot of people out there who will benefit greatly from your words of wisdom. And obviously, I love the fact that you are contributing to Curriculum Perspectives, which is our next issue that's coming out soon. But a lot of your work we will definitely add into our comment section so people can go and explore just the magnitude and the wonderful work that you are doing. So to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us here today. It has been such a great day of conversation and growth and learning, I know for myself. We welcome you back soon, and so we hope that everybody today has a fantastic day. Thank you very much.